Good morning.
Good morning.
So I was aiming for a Star Wars theme this morning. I don't know if I succeeded or not. So how many of you have seen the latest Star Wars movie? Wow, not a lot.
No.
Okay. Well, so there are going to be no spoilers this morning, so if you don't have to worry about that, right? I mean, you all know what's going to happen, right? The good guys win, sort of, and there's going to be a sequel. There you go. That's the story. But I thought, so this morning I thought we'd compare the sort of basic Star Wars plot, which you've all seen already anyway, with the story that was just read. Because they have some remarkable things in common and some interesting things where they're different. So let's start with things they have in common. One thing they have in common is that they're actually both entertaining stories. And I think that's okay, right? I mean, the whole point of Star Wars thing is to be entertaining. And right, the Matthew story is also a good story. First one, in the time of King Herod. So we start our story with a horrible, despotic ruler, right? Whatever you think about the current government in any part of the world today, they're probably better than Herod was, right? I mean, our current president likes to fire things. Herod just liked to kill people, right? Including significant members of his own family. Okay, so Herod was just a horrible, horrible, paranoid. I don't know if he was schizophrenic or not, but certainly way up on the paranoid scale. And yeah, so we start with King Herod, right? And Jesus is born in Bethlehem of Judea, so we're in the middle of nowhere suddenly. And wise men, magi, ooh, what are they? They come from the mysterious east, and they come to Jerusalem, right? The city of the king, right? So we've got all these elements, and we're just in the first verse, right? And so the story continues with all of these things, right? So they ask, where is to be born the King of the Jews? So we suddenly have rival kings going on in our story, and they see a mysterious star, not a Death Star in this case. You know, you can call it a life star if you want to contrast it, right? But you have a star that appears and it's rising, right? And you've got secrets, and you have ancient books that are, you know, that someone has to consult this ancient book. Right, and this, by the way, appears in this new movie. I won't tell you what happens with the ancient books, right? But it's part of the new Star Wars movie, right? And there's gold in this story, and frankincense, and myrrh, right? And I don't know what a baby's going to do with myrrh, but anything spelled M-Y-R-R-H is going to be really cool, right? You just know it because of the way it's spelled, right? And so there's all of these bits of the story. It's an entertaining story. It's a well-told, entertaining story, and that's okay. And that's one of the reasons that we tell this story every year, because it's a good story. The second thing that Star Wars thing has, you know, in parallel with the Matthew story, is that both stories are part of creating communities. In the Star Wars community, in a lot of ways, the reason I went to the last Star Wars movie is because I wanted to be part of the conversation. And quite often, here and there you go and someone goes, hey, have you seen the latest Star Wars movie? What did you think? And if you haven't seen it, you go, I didn't really see it. Well, you should go see it because this and this and this. Oh, don't, shut up, don't tell me, because I really do want to go see it, right? And so there's all this conversation, and then some people get really into it, right? So you can go to Star Wars conventions and Star Wars gatherings, right? And if you know Tom's daughter Katie, right, she likes to dress up as a Jedi. She's got the whole costume. Right? So there's a whole community that's created. And obviously, with the Magi story, right, here we are. Right? You could have, this morning, gone to see The Last Jedi instead of doing this, but here you are, right, for whatever reason. Right? And maybe you're regretting this already, but here you are. Right? And so part of being here, right, and being part of this group is knowing the story. You can't, so that when you're in church and somebody says, hey, what do you think about the Magi? If you're one of those people who goes, what's a Magi? Then you're clearly outside the community and not inside the community. You got to know what a wise man is. right? Well, you don't have to, but it's sort of, it's one of the things you're going to learn, right? So we tell a children's story so that the children know the story so they can become part of the community. So that's part of the intention of both things is the creation of community. A third thing that these two stories have in common is that I don't think it's worth overthinking them. Right? And it happens in both cases, right? Like, so you can get into like the physics of a Death Star, right? Or the physics of the Force, or how does this all work, and how does this plot work with this plot, and is this plot really the same as that plot, and is this character changing too much, or is this all in keeping with the character, right? And you can go over and over and over again, and you can, start getting really, really, really into this, and, I mean, it's a movie, okay? Right? And I think to some extent the same is true with the story of the Magi. Right? How does a star stop over a house? Well, we could spend a lot of time trying to figure out exactly how a star stops over the house, but I think the short answer is, it doesn't. And that's okay, because it's not that kind of story. This is not a scientific description of an event. This is a story that has other purposes besides, right, trying to describe something, right? So exactly what is a Magi, and which part of the East are they from? Because if you head east from Jerusalem, you got a lot of territory, right? Are these Iranian Magi? Are these like Chinese Magi? Or are they, and of course, what is a Magi? And, so you could spend, and goodness knows, Christians throughout centuries have spent far too much time trying to, figure out the scientific and theological and implication of all of this. And I don't think it's worth doing that. And, if we're going to start kicking each other out of church because we don't really believe in the star being an exact historical event, we've overthought this. So those were the three really quick similarities between the two stories. The differences are also important. The first thing, which you may not expect, is that the story in Matthew is actually a lot more gruesome. Right? I mean, we know there's all this violence in the movies, people say. People talk about, pop culture, there's too much violence all over. And then you get to this story, and we of course stopped before the gruesome part of this story. We just sort of read the cute part of the story, right? But if we'd have kept reading this story, we'd have noticed that Herod then commands all of the children under 2 years old in the town/region of Bethlehem to be slaughtered. I don't know if any of you people play video games. Or watch movies. Probably some of you have watched movies. Can you think of a video game or a movie today where somebody deliberately goes out and slaughters babies? There are certainly movies where children get killed as sort of a byproduct of other violence that's going on. But this is a movie about somebody who goes out and deliberately orders the slaughter of babies. That doesn't happen in modern pop culture. Right? Would a soldier actually do that? What would you have to do to a human being so that they would follow a command like that? And how long would it be before that human being would psychologically recover from having done it? And wouldn't that, it's got to follow you for the rest of your life unless you're seriously psychotic before you start. It's a horrible, horrible story. Right? Right? So there it is. And it's worth noticing. This is a gruesome story from a gruesome world. The second difference, which is also important, is that there's no revenge fantasy in this story. And let's face it, pretty much every movie you watch today has a revenge fantasy in it. Right? Whether it's, the bad guys who came and killed off your family, or, Your sister who stole your boyfriend. Most movies today have some sort of revenge fantasy built into them. And, right, I don't know if you noticed this morning, but we missed a revenge fantasy. Psalm 72. We read the portion of Psalm 72 that the lectionary says we're supposed to read. So we mostly use the lectionary here, and the lectionary said Psalm 72, verses 1 to 7, and then 12 to wherever. I always get suspicious when this happens, right? And there's a reason I get suspicious, because when you start getting suspicious, you know, right? So did anyone bother to read the stuff we missed? So no one's as suspicious as I am, right? Verse 9 in Psalm 72. May his foes bow down before him and his enemies lick the dust. Right? We skipped the revenge fantasy part, but it's there. Right? Even the psalmist has a revenge fantasy for this king who's coming. But there isn't one in the Magi story. Herod does this horrible, horrible, horrible thing, and Jesus and his family flee Egypt. And the interesting thing is that history provided this perfect opportunity for the writer to insert a revenge fantasy. It's not like, well, you know, you couldn't put one there. Because not long after this, Herod dies. So the writer could just as easily have said, and the Lord put Herod to death for this horrible thing. Revenge fantasy, there we are, we got a tick, right? And it's not there. Herod died. After Herod died, Jesus and his family went back. And of course, right, and so in a lot of ways what's interesting in a good story is what's not there. Because, you know, especially when we're expecting it. And let's face it, we're expecting it. And all the way through the Gospels. Right? You got these opportunities for revenge fantasies going on, and Jesus saying, yeah, but someday. Right? And once in a while it appears kind of in the apocalyptic parts of the New Testament, which is why I don't like the apocalyptic parts of the New Testament, because I think most of the rest of the New Testament says this revenge fantasy is a little out of control here. And so, right, Jesus is even, like Jesus dies on the cross, returns, and slaughters all his enemies, right? No, he doesn't. He comes back and ultimately, he proclaims a gospel of salvation that includes the Romans. So it's not just like he's not going to do the revenge thing, but he desires, he dies for the Romans. Right? He died for Herod, except Herod's already dead. Right? He dies for the soldiers who killed all those kids in Bethlehem. And he died, right? So this, right, it's not just that there's a lack of revenge fantasy, but there's a very strong unrevenge fantasy in this story. And that's hard. Here we are 2,000 years later, and the revenge fantasy is still easier, even in our good Christian country. Right? The revenge fantasy is everywhere. And because it's human. It's what we want. It's what there's large parts of our brain that are built for revenge fantasies. And Jesus says, no, not going to go there. And finally, the third difference is purpose. The purpose of the Star Wars movie is to make money. That's the whole thing. The reason there's going to be a sequel is because this one made money and the last one made money, so probably the next one's going to make money too. Right? And whatever else happens in this movie, it's all just about making money. And it's also really important to remember that there's a purpose to the Matthew story. And it's part of the larger gospel story, right? And it's part of the creation of this community, but the creation of this community is also for a purpose. Right? The creation of the Star Wars community is to make money. That's what it's for. The purpose of this community is, oh, by the way, we're supposed to go out and transform the world. shouldn't take us longer than half a week, right? Next week we'll come back and celebrate the fact that we're done. Right? Which is why we keep meeting this here every week, because we got our work cut out for us. Right? And there's also joy, right? I mean, it's not just all, oh, by the way, you have to go out there and work and you can't ever celebrate and make sure, right? Because clearly one of the purposes of the pastoral work is to make sure no one ever has any fun. So we also rejoice and we also have fun and laugh and play, right? But there's a larger purpose, right? The creation of this kingdom of God thing with the help of God. So one of the ways that we both celebrate and remember and all sorts of things is to have communion together, is to eat and to drink and to remember this story that we're part of, and to remember why we're here. So I invite you to come forward. We're going to be singing the first verse of Blessed Be the Tie That Binds, so if you don't know it, you might want to bring your hymnal, but it's fairly straightforward.